This is an area I think I found really difficult with work when I'm struggling and not wanting to speak out and say something because you're worried that you're going to be seen as a failure, that you're not coping.
Employment with autism has been an interesting journey for me. I spent most of the start of my career thinking that, I could do certain things, but I couldn't do other things. Now, I went straight into teaching from university. I loved teaching. I was a design and technology teacher, very kinesthetic, hands-on, building things, doing things with electronics, coding, loved that stuff. When it came to marking kids' work or spending time, marking essays or case studies or internal assessments, really struggled. I think I realised that there was a problem when I had to mark children's essays by reading them backwards. And the reason I did that was because I could spot mistakes that they'd made in the text by reading it backwards. I can't see things when I read forwards. I surprise people when I say that I've never read a book. I dive into books, I fact find from factual books. I have never read in my entire life a fictional book. The same thing with the kids' essays. I will read through it, but I'll have to do a chunk at a time, and then I read it backwards to do the grammatical changes. Now, nobody else knew that in my early career because I masked it really well. I have my alter ego, which is the teacher and the person at work, and I pretend that I know what I'm doing. I might spend 3 or 4 hours marking a piece of work, but nobody else sees that, and I'll tell everybody I did it in 20 minutes.
I was in teaching for 17 years, and I was in mainstream schools, special schools, and alternative education organisations, and I wasn't coping well in the workplace. Whether it was, demands made of me verbally that I couldn't remember, then it would be like, well, why haven't you done this? Sitting through long meetings was very hard, and not feeling that I could just get up and leave. Luckily I'm not in those situations anymore.
Last year, for the first time, I decided to speak out and to talk to somebody at work and say, look, I'm just having these struggles and I need a bit of help. And they were brilliant. They took some things away from me that just relieved a bit of pressure. But I remember in that meeting that I really struggled with admitting that we couldn't cope and that we needed some extra help. And, sometimes you have to do that. You have to ask for help, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Last year, I did a huge LinkedIn post, as you do when you're in business. It's the way you tell people about your life. And I explained my diagnosis, and I did it partly because I wanted to encourage other women my age, people who might have been kind of going through similar things to me. I wanted to just explain what that looked like. And I shouldn't say pleasantly surprised, I kind of expected it, but it was a pleasant surprise that a number of women in my network did reach out to me privately and said, we saw your post, could we have a coffee? And that was really nice. But the other side of it that I should have expected but hadn't quite was people who got in touch with me who've worked with me very, very closely but said things like, I would never have thought you've got ADHD because you've got such an amazing attention to detail. I do due diligence, corporate finance as a profession, so my attention to detail is second to none. But when you say the word ADHD, people think that means you've got no attention. And it's that balance of kind of saying, no, I've got no attention if it's something that's just boring. Because if it's boring, I cannot get my brain to focus on it no matter what. But if it's something I'm interested in, I will absolutely hyper-focus.
And I did open up to somebody, and the immediate response, I was like, I think I might be this, this and this. Pulled out all these books, done the research, and it was a manager at work, and her reaction was, oh no, you're autistic. You're not like Roy from Coronation Street, he's autistic. And I was like, wow, just really hurt. and didn't know what to say. It felt like a punch in the guts. And when I tried to justify something else, oh, my husband does that when he's happy, you know, clapping his hands. So just real kind of shut down. And this was, you know, she was lovely. So if a lovely person that you trust can react like that, then my thinking was, well, I'm not going to tell anyone, and I must be a fraud. I must be, because I'm on the surface looking like I'm functioning well.
So I think it's great that people are talking about it a lot more, but I still think there's that stigma in that it's being talked about. Some businesses are doing a really, really brilliant job at seeing the positives, at seeing diversity and all the strengths it brings, where they're really recognising that if you bring neurodivergent people into the workforce and you give them an environment that they can thrive in, you can just get the most brilliant innovation.
I think employers could do well, it's not necessarily employers, it's individuals. You know, if everybody was more open to people who are neurodivergent, the world would be an easier place. You know, I work in an environment with lovely, lovely people, but we still have those 4-hour meetings. Now, in those 4-hour meetings, if anybody asks me a question, I'll be able to tell them exactly how many ceiling tiles there are in the room, or exactly how many panes of glass there are in the room, or how many times the bell has gone off in the background. But I can't focus on what's going on in the room. You know, if there's more than 3 or 4 people talking at the same time, I can't listen in. I lose track, or I start focusing on something else. Having individuals in the room that understand that is incredibly useful, but it's only possible if people admit that they're on the spectrum. And that's the difficulty, is that you've got to be ultra confident to say, yeah, I'm autistic. Because people will think, well, actually, if I admit I'm autistic, am I going to be able to keep my job?
People who are neurotypical trying to figure out how to work best with people who are neurodivergent is, firstly, ask how they like to work, and ask which things they find easy, which things they find difficult, but in the sense of the working environment as well as the actual tasks. But also observe, because people won't always tell you. People might not even be aware themselves of the situations that they do and don't like. Maybe just try some different environments, try some different work setups. And that's actually for neurotypical people as well, because everyone works differently, everyone thinks differently. You don't have to have autism, ADHD to like a different working setup than the person you might be sat next to.
You know, in the large organisations, there is help and support there that you can access, but you've got to access it. So you've got to make the effort yourself. So we do talk a lot about neurodiversity inclusion at work. We have mental health first aiders now, so people that you can reach out and talk. But you've got to be the one to instigate that. And that, I think, is the hardest part. So although the help and the support is there, unless somebody is going to be checking in on you and saying, is everything okay, Jason? You know. So in other words, I think for employers, it's being aware of your particular situation and making sure that you're not just reviewing, evaluating how well you're doing the job, but putting that extra effort into your personal situation and what's going on. So being aware of that. For me, you know, I had to make that effort to speak out, and that was really hard, because I think that employee-employee relationship, you're worried about keeping your job. And if you suddenly admit, I'm struggling, does that mean now, well, you're not up to the job, we'll get somebody else? So I think that's always the fear and the worry about how open can you be.
Some attitudes are not okay. You know, somebody I think it was on LinkedIn, tried to disclose their ADHD, and the manager she disclosed it to said something like, I always knew you were a bit mad. You know, so really grossly inappropriate things. So I think people need policies that are used and followed, reviewed and written by neurodivergent people. The training needs to be there, the understanding. So it's not just awareness, people have heard of these things, but how can we actually help the people? We speak to them and we listen and we believe them. That's kind of what needs to happen.
If I look back just in the years since I've been diagnosed, there's so much more talk about it. There are so many kind of groups on social media supporting it. I think the conversation is really accelerating, and that can only be, well, I thought could only be a positive thing, but there has been kind of a raft of it recently where it's almost becoming a bit of a buzzword of, oh, doesn't everyone want to have ADHD? And you think, no, actually, that this is a real thing that we all have to deal with, and it brings challenges and it brings strengths. So I think it's some brilliant moves in the world of work. I think it's something that businesses should really embrace. Businesses should really understand that the more diverse your workforce, and in every regard, but particularly with neurodiversity, the more innovation you can have. And just because we think differently, sometimes in slightly bizarre ways, sometimes in ways that won't be that helpful, but we also come up with kind of brilliant suggestions, and we will come up with new ideas.